talk about the likely impact of this latest strike by Israel in Rafah?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to have any new impact. I mean, there's been impacts. I mean, nearly every day, and you've had the ICJ issue rulings and say that they have to stop this. The Israelis have self-determined that they are not in violation of these things, and they're continuing on with the Rafah operation. You had the United States saying that we won't support it unless these things happen, and maybe they happened, maybe they didn't, but it seems like we're still supporting. So it doesn't look like anything's changing. The only thing that's changing is the death count on the Palestinians. It just keeps going up with these, what are so-called accidents, or whether they were or whether they weren't. It doesn't matter to the people. They're still getting killed in large numbers.
And you mentioned that pressure. We know Israel's government is facing an unprecedented level of diplomatic pressure. It does not seem to have deterred the prime minister, as you also alluded to. But do you think it's having any impact behind the scenes?
Well, it certainly is having an impact in hardening positions among those who don't like Israel, and I think they continue to bleed support from the West. I mean, lots of people who started off quite supportive of Israel they lose that in the West. And I've been warning really since the beginning of this conflict that if Israel loses the support of the West, they could end up in a worse position than they were security-wise prior to October 7th. And I don't see anything to change that concern. And, as I say nearly every time I'm on your show here, Israel is not going to bring peace by continuing to go in this offensive in Rafah. It's just not going to be able to kill its way to peace. It's just going to make more problems. And this just seems to be the next iteration of that path.
And Colonel, we mentioned this at the top as well, that, this strike on Rafah came hours after Hamas fired its barrage of rockets at Tel Aviv. That happened for the first time in months. But what does that tell you about the ability of Hamas?
Well, look, these rockets are basically unguided rockets. They have very low payload. I think most of them, if not all of them, were intercepted anyway, and those that weren't didn't cause any damage. This is a desperation move by them that they can do something. It tells you that's how low their capabilities are, that there hasn't been any of this, because they're just almost out of them, and they're just trying to do something to show that they have some viability, but militarily speaking, it's inconsequential.
And something that certainly the families have tried to keep at the forefront. What about the hostages in all of this? Do you think most of them, some of them, are still alive and that they will be able to come home?
I'm sure many of them are still alive, because it's in Hamas's interest to keep them alive, to be able to continue to use them as leverage, or at least the possibility of it. But I know that the protest among the Israeli population, especially among those who are related to the hostages, continues to increase. They keep having these protests in large numbers going on. Doesn't get much coverage in the West, but the anguish of the civilians is very high. And frankly, it doesn't look like the Israeli government really prioritized getting them back, because they don't seem to be willing to make any kind of a deal to get them. And it's my heart bleeds so badly for the family members of these hostages.
And I want to talk about the Biden administration. Do you think the U.S. will change its response as we get closer to the November election? Because, I think critics would say that the administration is sending mixed messages. Probably that's at best.
Well, yeah, that's at best. I think what's honestly going to determine that, and I wish it weren't this way, but I think it is that it's going to be on the Biden election team taking a look at the polls. And if the polls say that enough people are turning against him and are going to be angry because he's not telling Israel no, he claims he's going to withhold weapons, but then doesn't. And if that starts to have enough bleed to where not enough people are going to vote for him to get him to win, then I think that he'll try and change. Of course, that's a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of people who are extremely pro-Israel that would be angry if he did move in the other direction. So it's going to be a dicey thing for them to do one way or the other. I wish they would just do whatever it takes to get the war over and the hostages home, and the electoral happens, whatever it does. But that's not reality in Washington, D.C. today, is it?
It does not seem to be. My last question for you, I ask you this all the time, but as we go day after day and the war continues, Lieutenant Colonel, how do you think it ends?
It will probably end at some point with Netanyahu claiming a victory. Maybe one of two possibilities. Once they get through Rafah, they can say, "All right, we've destroyed the last battalions. Now we're going to move into sustainment operations," and they'll say it's relatively over. Or they may actually then launch into Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, which I hope they don't, but that's entirely possible to try and clear that out as well. But however they claim it, all it's going to do is lower the temperature for a period of time, but the seeds for future conflict have just been sown in large quantities, and the overall long-term stability for Israel is just going to be bad. That's just the truth of it.